Well, the feelings, dogs, cats, cows, pigs, the whole lot, could soon be protected by law in Victoria. And when I say feelings, I'm not talking about the ways in which animals might feel cold or hot or pain, which I don't think anyone disputes. We're talking about their emotional well-being, with the Andrews government confirming changes to the laws in Victoria that will see animals recognised as sentient beings in a bid to stamp out cruelty. It follows the release of a directions paper last year which recommended requiring those in care of an animal to take reasonable steps to provide an acceptable level of care. But opponents of the proposed laws to the Prevention of Cruelty Act, these amendments to the Act, well, they're warning that if not thought through carefully, these changes could have significant unintended legal consequences. For more on this, I'm joined here in Melbourne by the President of the Victorian Farmers Federation, Emma Germano. I tell you what, these are really radical changes. I don't think anyone disputes that we want to look after animals well. We're not just talking about farmers, of course. You represent the VFF, but we're talking about people that have pets and animals in the community in our urban centres. Give us a sense of what the change to recognising a sentient being really means.
Well, as you said, there can be some serious unintended consequences. We've seen cases overseas where animals have sued their owners and been emancipated from those owners. We're really concerned that this is actually a step towards shutting down animal agriculture rather than something that's just about treating animals well, which is exactly what we want to do and why animal welfare is so important.
So one of the industries that have been in the gun is the dairy farming. And of course, to get milk, you require a pregnant cow. And of course, once the heifer or the calf is birthed, you then have milk, and that's the production of milk. If a cow is recognised as having emotions and feelings, the loss of her calf might be a legal route for people to shut down a dairy farm. Am I being too, out there with that sort of scenario?
No, definitely not. But I think what you're talking about is something that consumers are rightly concerned about, and farmers want to ensure that we're transparent about what our practices are. We believe that giving Australians the choice to eat whatever it is that they like to eat is really important, and that we need to be transparent so they can make those choices for themselves. Having said that, there's practices in agriculture that we're always improving, and that we acknowledge some things can be always better, so it's continuous improvement. We've just got to be really careful. We're going down a very slippery slope here, and we know that these laws that are taking place across the world are leading to some industries being shut down.
Is this, there's an animal justice MP in the Victorian Parliament. There was some tight negotiations last year around COVID to get emergency powers through the Parliament late at night. The political cynic in me would see that there's some horse trading that's been going on here. Do you feel that there's been adequate consultation? Do you feel that this is a Trojan horse, perhaps, for a broader animal welfare agenda?
Or you make quite the point about the politics around this. So there are certain MPs that are pushing the agenda and potentially not thinking about the unintended consequences even as pet owners themselves. This is not just something that affects agriculture, it's every animal, as you said.
So just on that, talk to me about pets. I've got a dog. I split up with my partner. There's usually a dispute as to who owns the animal. It's a property right, generally an animal. Does that sort of thing change under this legislation?
Potentially. We might have to ask your pets who they'd prefer to live with in the event that would happen. I use the example of going to dog parks in Melbourne. I get particularly irked by working dogs that live in the city. Not all of them seem unhappy to me, but some of them certainly seem dissatisfied. They've been bred for the purpose of working. Does it come down to my opinion then as to whether or not that dog is happy? And if I decide it's not happy, should I jump over somebody's fence and steal the dog? And that's essentially where this has come from, because it was actually about the trespassing inquiry, the animal activism inquiry, where this became a recommendation. So we're saying, hang on a minute, you're asking the farmers to have a look at animal welfare rather than actually addressing the issue of trespass and whether or not that's an appropriate way for people to make a stance about animal agriculture.
So you're saying that this, the argument from the activist is they have a right to trespass on the farm because they are there emancipating an animal. Is that the
Potentially,
argument?
or you know, some activists have said that it's because they believe that farmers are not being transparent about the practices that we use on our farms. You know, we heavily dispute that. You know, there's lots of farmers that would welcome you onto their farm. A lot of the industry bodies have done a lot of work creating that transparency so that people can understand where their food comes from. And that's what we've got to be realistic about. This is about where our food comes from.
What's been the level of debate inside the Victorian agricultural community? What's been the level of consultation you've had with Victorian government ministers?
So we've discussed our issues with some of the proposals with ministers. We made a submission into the inquiry and we've responded to the draft paper that's been put out. I guess that it's interesting because you're right in saying that some of the agricultural industries within the whole of agriculture, so there's dairy and there's egg production and chicken meat production, all sorts of things, have possibly slightly disagreed with each other around the notion of sentience. So whilst everybody's really comfortable with accepting the fact that an animal can perceive the world around it, we know that very well as farmers and we do our best to make sure those animals are comfortable. The inclusion of that word in the Act, we were wondering whether or not it was appropriate to push the point that it shouldn't be included in the Act. But again, we don't understand what those legal consequences might be.
Yeah, well, just let me jump in there because the word sentient has appeared in legislation of this ilk in the EU, for example. But there's a big difference between saying an animal can feel, and I use the hot, cold, pain sort of threshold, as opposed to an animal having feelings. How do you judge or arbitrate an animal's feelings?
Well, that's the exact problem with why we don't want to see this included in the Act, because that's the point. How do you determine how happy or sad or any of those feelings that an animal might have? Who becomes the arbitrator? Who makes those decisions? And can that lead to industries being shut down?
And just quickly, what's the timeline on this bill?
So we're looking at next year before it will be introduced into Parliament. Again, there's a bit of disappointment around that. The animal activism inquiry happened some time ago, and we're also waiting to see what's going to happen with the trespass bill and whether or not we're going to see a bolstering of those laws to tell activists that jumping over fences and terrorising people in their homes, and that's many of our farms are our homes, is an inappropriate way to engage in a conversation about how we want our food grown and raised.
Emma Germano, thank you for your time.
Thanks.